What's up, hobby friends? In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I paint the blue color on my Necrons. I just want to preface that in this video, I ended up using two webcams. I was using my original Logitech C920 to record painting the menhirs, the blue energy portion, and then I picked up the Brio 4K from Logitech halfway through painting the model, and I ended up using the Brio to record painting the blades of one of the attendants. So you're going to see a jump in the quality and more importantly the color and exposure that I haven't quite been able to color match in post editing. So for that I do apologize. In order to make these videos as informative as possible, I have included as much of the painting process as necessary. However, in the interest of cutting down on the video time and length, I have chosen to speed up these parts. If you want to skip these parts and just jump to the next step, you can use the timestamp links in the video description below. So for those of you who have been following along with the Necrons or who have seen my Necron models online, either on Facebook, Instagram, you know that I use this blue energy recipe for a lot of the energy portions of my Necrons. So things like the blades, orbs, cabling, all these elements are all painted with the same colors. It helps to keep the color scheme very simple, very unified. There's only a couple of major colors are in my recipe. And because a lot of my army is either a neutral silver or a more natural ivory cream color, this vibrant blue tone really adds a lot of punch and a lot of contrast to the models. So you can see, for example, in Szarekh, I've been able to use the blue to pop out very high contrast or high detail elements I want to draw attention to. So this life force being sucked out, his blue energy blades, some of his orbs. On my Scorpex, the blades really stand out on the battlefield and draw a lot of attention to them. And similarly on this Hexmark, he's got his blue energy orb in the back and the cabling for his 6 pistols. So as I'm painting the Silent King, this is going to be no different. All of his blue energy is going to be painted in the same color, and I've already done a sample on the mount for his dais or palanquin. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how I paint this recipe on the bottom of this menhir. Now you can see that I've already done a base coat on the menhir. This is just to speed up the process. You're going to have to do a couple of thin coats because I've done this on black primer. The color is a fairly bright color and won't adhere in 1 or 2 passes. You'll have to do several. I think I ended up doing 5 passes more or less. There's some rough spots, but because I'm going to be highlighting on top of them, I'm not too worried about them being perfectly blue. So the 3 colors we're going to need for this tutorial. For the base coat, I'm using Scale Colors Caribbean Blue, and this is the color that you see here. My initial color scheme when I first painted the army a couple of years ago, I was using straight oxide, Nihilakh Oxide, on black primer. While it was okay for some of the more thin runic elements and lines, for painting large surfaces like the new blades in a lot of the new Necrons that were released last year, I needed to come up with a different way to get a nice even blue base coat that wasn't using oxide and painting 1,000 layers. So I brought in the Scale Color Caribbean Blue as a nice base color to use. And once we've done a wash of our oxide, it pretty much removes all of this color. So really, we're only using this for the base coat and nothing else. So once we've got a base color of our Caribbean Blue, we're then going to start working up first with a wash of our oxide to tint the color back to the original sort of teal color that I'd used. And then we're going to highlight up by mixing in progressive amounts of Vallejo white. So on top of our base coat, we're just going to apply a very liberal coat or liberal wash of Nihilakh Oxide. And our goal at this stage is to just tint everything with this color. Once you've done your wash, you want to let the oxide fully dry on the model before we proceed to our next step. So in really, painting all of this blue energy is just a simple exercise in glazing and layering. So what we're going to do is we're going to start mixing progressive amounts of Vallejo white into our oxide, and we're going to build up a couple of layers until we get to pretty much pure white. We're going to block in sort of where our brightest highlights go, and we're going to do, particularly on this blue energy, we're going to roughly block in broad strokes where these highlights are going to go. Once we've done that step, we're going to then take our oxide and we're going to glaze back and smooth out those transitions to create smoother blends before returning with Vallejo White to add our final highlights. So we're just prepping the colors in our palette. I like to get a liberal amount of the oxide because we do go through it very quickly, and then mix in just a touch of white, and that will give us the color for our first block-in stage. Now remember again, because we are glazing on top or glazing back down with our oxide afterwards, this step transition can be a little more sudden or a little higher in value. I'm not looking to create a perfectly smooth blend right out of the gate. I'm just looking to start blocking in my lights and shadows. Now this lightning has been sculpted in a very cool fashion where it's got these different planes and very sharp angular edges. So really, as I'm applying my first highlight pass, I'm thinking of my light source where I want my light to be coming from, and then I'm picking different surfaces to alternate so that I'm always going to have a bright surface and a dark surface side by side. And that's the first pass done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take more white. We're going to mix it in with our oxide for a brighter highlight. And we're going to start refining. At this point, we're going to start refining some of our um, light points to start focusing on where we want our bright whites to be. Now, because I'm using a wet palette and because Nihilakh Oxide is a fairly diluted color out of the pot, um, as I'm applying these subsequent highlight stages, I'm also starting to slowly feather in and help create some of these initial transitions. I am still being very rough and tumble with how I'm applying the color, but just through brush control and because I'm very familiar with the technique, I'm already starting to glaze in and help smooth out these transitions. Now, how sudden you make these jumps from oxide to white are up to you. If you're very comfortable with glazing, then you can make your transitions much more sudden, much faster. If you're not, then you might want to spend a little more time and add more progressive highlights. The more work you put in at this stage, the less you'll have to do in the glazing step to help smooth out these colors. And we're simply repeating this process, working up through progressive amounts of more white to less oxide until we've pretty much reached pure white. So now that we've got most of our highlights blocked in and we've taken our highlights almost to pure white, we haven't gone quite to pure white yet, it's now time to start glazing in some of our shadows back. And so to do this, we're going to use oxide and white, and we're going to start applying some very thin coats to smooth out some of these transitions. So rather than make the jump straight to oxide first, we're going to take oxide with a bit of white, just a little bit, so it's a little brighter than our deepest shadows. We're going to work up a very thin glaze. And we're going to start applying a first pass onto some of these, our shadowed areas. And we're just going to start creating some smoother transitions. And what we're going to do is we're just going to keep adding more and more oxide until we get to pure oxide. And we're going to keep glazing in, smooth out some of our shadows, knock back some of these um, sharper highlights, and just create nice smooth blends all over the energy glows. And now that our glazes are done, we've gotten a very nice smooth transition between all of our colors, our lights and shadows. We're now going to go back in with pure white diluted, and we're going to finalize our highlights. We're going to pick out some of the brightest spots, and we're also going to um, add in some of our final line highlights. Now, the trick I found with this step is to not go overboard with where you're applying your white highlights. You don't need to highlight every single surface and edge, but if you pick out certain key points, it really helps to accentuate the shape of the energy and creates these points of focus or contrast that help to, I guess, make the shapes and the colors pop. So, for example, here, I don't need to pull this white line all the way to the bottom, but I'm going to focus on the tip right there, and I'm going to gently add a little bit on the bottom. Okay, so I've created this point of contrast, or this bright highlight right here, these bright spots where this energy is sort of focusing and collecting. And we just do this all over the model until we've achieved a result that we're happy with. Now, because these are going to be energy orbs and they also provide their own illumination, um, and because these menhirs are are front and back. They're sort of universally either front or back. I want to make sure that I'm highlighting everything so that it looks good from both sides. So it could potentially be the front on this side or this side. Now, normally I wouldn't do this for a model just because there's a clear defined front and back, but especially on these because they are unidirectional and I don't want to have to worry about which side's front and back on the tabletop. I want them to be able to look good regardless. I'm just going to take a little more care as I'm highlighting to make sure that they're properly lit from both sides.
Oh my god, no, okay, so it's the constant sound.
And that's how I paint the blue energy on my Necrons. I'm going to follow up this portion of the video with a time lapse of painting one of the blades on the attendants. All the colors are going to be the exact same. The process is exactly the same. I start with a base coat of Scale Colors Caribbean Blue. I give it a wash of the Nihilakh Oxide color. I work my way up from oxide to white, blocking in my highlights. And then I glaze back in with oxide for my shadows and just smooth out the blends before doing final highlights and pops with pure white. The process ends up being the same, even if the material, the blade, being much sharper and much more rigid than this organic energy, might feel a little different. But you're going to see in the application that it's actually very much the same process. The colors and the way we apply the colors end up being exactly the same. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and don't forget to check out the other videos in my Necron Szarekh series. Don't forget to subscribe for more awesome weekly content, and to check out my Instagram as John the Ho for daily updates on my hobby projects. Until next time, happy hobbying.